Now, coming off of the previous chapter, I think a lot of us have high expectations as to what is to come from Luffy's Awakening, because this chapter, even though it showed us something, I think it only showed us a glimpse as to Luffy's true power in this form. There's definitely more that Oda isn't telling us, and I think we've only just scratched the surface with this chapter. But in this video, I will be talking about 5 potentially key details you might have missed that could mean a lot of things moving forward. Now, as usual, I would appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video, subscribe if you're new here, and hit the bell if you want to get notified for future videos. Now, one of the more interesting things about Luffy's new transformation is his heartbeat. His heartbeat is, I'm assuming, beating very fast to the point that it's very noticeable to Luffy, but Luffy doesn't mind because he's having a blast. Now, this is something that people are easily overlooking because Luffy states that his heartbeat sounds funny. Now, at first glance, you wouldn't think too much about it because it's supposed to signify the drums of liberation, but at the same time, this could be very reminiscent to Gear Second, in which he could be in a state where his heart is pumping so much that he's almost euphoric, almost kind of like a sugar rush, again, which ties into Luffy saying that he's having a blast. He's obviously high off of this power in a sense, right? So this could be hinting towards a drawback. A lot of people would think that Gear 5 is not going to have any drawbacks, but I assure you that it will most definitely have a drawback, just like Luffy's other forms. I don't see Oda changing the schemes of Luffy's power throughout the course of the series. Every gear has some sort of drawback. Gear 5 is not going to be an exception. It's not very reasonable to think that this form will not have a drawback. And again, you have to take into account that this is Luffy's first time using Awakening. It's not like he's mastered it or anything, right? I mean, he hasn't even mastered Gear 4th, so what would make you think that he's adept in using Awakening on his first try? So yeah, this heartbeat that Luffy's having will most definitely relate to the drawback of this form. We don't know what that is yet, but we will eventually find out what that is. And you know, potentially with mastery of his Awakening, he can potentially limit the drawbacks of this form. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, the second thing that I do want to point out is that Luffy's hair is on fire. Now again, this was something that was referenced in one of the cover pages with Luffy when he was in a Ken outfit with glowing fist and his hair on fire. This is an obvious reference to Ken from Street Fighter, but we do also know that this form is supposed to represent Nika's moniker, which is the sun god. Now, of course, there's a lot of thematic reasons as to why he's viewed as the sun god, because he's supposedly the person that saves people from evil, or another word you can use is darkness. So he represents the sun in the idea that he is the savior of people. But you could also take it in a literal sense that he had fire-related abilities, which will most likely be the case, and this could give us an insight as to Luffy's Red Hawk and how he's able to manifest that sort of ability. Now, I don't think it's a huge part of his power. It's more like a separate ability than his rubber body, but it is something that Luffy may have full access to now that he's awakened. So we might see more fire-related attacks that Luffy will be using moving forward, and perhaps on an even greater scale than what we've seen with the Red Hawk so far. And again, it's a very symbolic thing, as it also references and hints towards Luffy's fight versus Blackbeard, the sun god versus the god of darkness. Maybe that's Blackbeard's title, we don't know. It happened with Ace, versus Blackbeard in the past, and it will most likely happen with Luffy versus Blackbeard again, but this time with the sun actually winning. So hopefully we get more insight as to where this fire-related ability comes from. Now, something else that was kind of overlooked in this chapter was that the form that we see in chapter 1043 was different than what we saw in chapter 1044. Now, the form that I'm talking about here is Luffy in that gooey state when he was initially revealed to be Joy Boy by Zunisha. We see that Luffy's body was sort of turning into a gooey-like substance, almost like Katakuri's mochi, but in the previous chapter, we come to see that that was nowhere to be seen. And I guess that makes sense because this chapter was just to introduce Luffy's new powers and not actually show us everything about what it can do, right? So this may be something that we see moving forward, in which Luffy is able to turn into a state where he's very Logia-like, similar to the Admirals and of course Katakuri. So it does seem that Luffy has like a Logia form that he hasn't shown yet, and it might be one of the more broken aspect of his ability, so that might be shown much later in this fight. Now, the fourth thing that I do want to mention is that Gear 5 might be a combination of all of his gears combined into one form. Now, obviously, as we can see, Gear 5 seems to be just base Luffy with fire on his hair. He also appears to have that steam that goes around his back just like it does in Gear 4th, but apart from that, he isn't that much different from base form. though when he attacks we can clearly see the difference in power in terms of his rubber abilities. Now what you would notice is that in this form he's able to go gear 3rd in a way that we haven't seen before, especially when he grabbed Kaido's body and started smashing him up and down. And so this sort of led me to the idea that he can use abilities like gear 4th in gear 5, if that makes any sense. So gear 5 is a form that isn't really one thing on its own. It's several abilities put together that can come out in different ways. One of them being his awakening and the other being the exponential boost to his rubber abilities, which is insane because unlike other awakenings we've seen thus far, it usually comes with one advantage or one ability that you gain from your awakening. With individuals like Katakuri and Doflamingo, they gained one ability, and that one ability was that they were able to affect their surroundings. And so in Luffy's case, he's able to not only get the ability to affect his surroundings, but he also has a buff to his body. And also people theorize since he's a mythical Zoan type, he also has this insane recovery, which is kind of hinted that that was the way he was able to come back to life. Because we know that Zoans when awakened have this insane recovery time. So maybe that's what happened here. So in essence, from what I can gather so far, Luffy possesses 3 different abilities that comes with his awakening, which is a lot different than the one ability that the Paramecia class usually gains. And I think this is the reason why Oda, whether planned or not, couldn't have the Gomu Gomu no Mi as just a Paramecia, because he would have to break a lot of the rules that he set up. And so in return, he showed us the awakening of a mythical Zoan, which is something that we have never seen in the story before. Luffy is the first case of a mythical Zoan being awakened in the story, and we didn't really know what happens when these guys awaken. We know that they were Zoans, but they were still different. And again, I've always been saying for the longest that mythical Zoans, because they have separate abilities that come with the animal-like traits that you do get, it most likely means that their awakening is much special and different than other fruits. So when it comes to gear 5, it's not exactly a one form thing. It's a stage in which Luffy can access all the abilities of his other forms as well as the abilities of his awakened powers. So it is truly the culmination of his fruit. Now the last and final thing that I do want to point out is something that the 5 elders mentioned that is going to be important, and I think it was something that was sort of highlighted, but I think a lot of people would overlook this and think nothing of it, especially in context as to what it's going to mean for Luffy moving forward. And again, this is something that has been reiterated time and time again in the story, and this isn't the first time that it's been mentioned here, and that was that Zoan types have a will of their own. Now, even though the reincarnation idea is out the window, the possession or Luffy being influenced by Nika is still a real possibility, because the whole Zoan having a will of their own isn't a new idea. This was something that Oda has been talking about for quite some time in the story, ever since we got the reveal of Zoan types being animated into weapons, and this happened all the way back in Alabasta. Now, I do have a theory on this, so I'm not going to talk too much about what has been revealed to us and what could potentially happen to Luffy in the future, but I will say that there could be some potential influence / possession that could happen to Luffy in the future, because in a sense, awakening means to wake something up. And in the case of Zoans, it could literally mean waking the beast within. And so maybe in the state of awakening for Zoans, the devil that resides inside the devil fruit becomes more active and has a more dominant presence within the user's body, in which it can result to the user getting influence or potentially possessed. And Oda has already foreshadowed this as a possibility. So I feel like that is something that could happen to Luffy. And again, I will drop another video pertaining to this idea, because Oda has already shown some things that hints towards this. But I do think that Oda made that statement there for a reason, and I think it might honestly be a clue to the origins of devil fruits. It seems that people's wills may have played a role in devil fruits being created, but overall I'm really excited to see what Luffy has to offer now. It seems that his ability is completely broken now, so we'll see how things play out. But that is pretty much it for this video, guys. I would appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Comment down below what you guys think. Hit the bell if you want to get notified for future videos. Subscribe for more One Piece content on this channel. You can follow me on Twitter at FerroSpace. But it is Ferro, guys, and I will see you folks later. Peace.